Hello tankers and tankettes, welcome to a viewer replay. This is Kavalan89, this is 8.11 and he's in the 110E3. And the reason we're looking at this particular replay is it's the only 110E3 game I actually have been sent. There are a lot of vehicles in World of Tanks and there's just some I have never covered, and the E3 and the E4 are two of them. So you might see an E4 video in the relatively near future as well. There's a couple more of those to choose from. But this was literally the only E3 game I had, and it was actually sent in response to another video, because the E3 of course is the tier 10 of the non-turreted American tank destroyer line. The E4 it has the same gun, basically worse armour, but it has a turret that can turn, I think it's like 90 degrees each way. So it's not a full turret, but even so it is just the actual fact of having a turret inherently makes it more flexible. But while this doesn't have a turret, it has completely bonkers frontal armor. It's even better frontally than the T95 effectively. Although the T95 has, I think, 300 and something mil at its thickest, this has got 300 and something mil at its thickest for a single plate on the beak, and I think the front of the superstructure as well. But the actual, like the lower front plate's a lot tougher than it is on the T95, and the MG cupola, which is usually on tanks a weak spot, on this it pretty much isn't unless you've got a really high pen gun. So this was actually sent in response to a T95 video that came out just under a year ago. And I don't know if you remember it, but it was a proper off-the game. Somebody in T95 and they bounced an absurd number of shells. And then it turned out QB he'd actually done a very similar video, again a T95, and I think it was actually proper off as well. But as we can see, this is Erlenberg and his team's defending, so this is a rather different sort of a setup. So there is one artillery platoon, but it's only tier 8, so yeah, unless it hits his side and rear, he's probably going to be fine, because while this thing is very tough to the front, like all the tanks from tier 8 to tier 10 on this line, well, just American tanks generally, even if they have good frontal armour, they typically have very weak rear and side armour. That's just kind of like American armour doctrine from possibly the Second World War onwards. I mean, that's when American tank development really kicked into high gear. But this is, I mean, both the E3 and the E4 are, they're some of the more fictional machines. They're not quite as fictional as, say, the T28 Prot is, but they're kind of like fudges and they're sort of semi-made up. And sometimes wargaming does that if they've got gaps to fill on a tech tree. They will, to their credit, try and find historical vehicles, but sometimes they put these kind of fudges in, or they'll klutz several designs together and make a kind of a I don't know, almost a kit bash, I guess you could call it. I'm thinking tanks like the T71, for example, which is two different designs, or the Lerva, which again is two different kind of specifications, as it were, for the same tank. So he's been able to do a bit of damage so far. The damage counter is a bit wonky, I'm not quite sure why. He's bouncing all kinds of shells, although he has taken 2 arty hits and 1 shot from the Waffenträger that actually did pen. He's also taken 4 damage from that Carnarvon, who's just given up firing AP entirely. Now these guys look like they are outnumbered. They lost at an ST1, they lost that, was that an IS-8 there? So, although they down these 2 tanks, but we know just from the sheer amount of bounces, and again, another unfortunate pen there, from the sheer amount of bounces, there are a lot of tanks here. There's 3 that we can see. There's the 215B, there's a Carnarvon back there, the Rheinmetall, the Indian Panzer, there's a 121 around somewhere, there's the Waffle, there's artillery firing at them. So it's a lot happening on this flank, and although this is the defending team, although all they have to do is hang on for 10 minutes and they've won, you can of course still win by going on the attack and mopping up the enemy team. And the other flank, although they have a massive numbers advantage, and okay, to be fair, I think there are more tier 8s on the other flank than there are on this one, but they're not pushing. The other flank seem perfectly content to just sit there. And even a most cursory glance at the minimap right now would let you know that this flank is in real danger of being overrun. Like, his armor is working really well. Kvalan is basically doing his level best to keep his strongest armor towards the enemy. And they're not particularly, like, the fact that they're not pushing up into this, it's, I guess, a testament to, like, the E4's doing a good job here as well. The fact that they are able to keep these guys back, that they are able, despite their inferior numbers, to be threatening enough, to be scary enough to prevent these tanks from just attacking, and they're not just falling back. Because if you see, it's an unfortunate bounce, but top of the turret on that thing's pretty tough. If you tend to see, like, situations like this, if you see the inferior number of enemies just falling back, usually the attacking side will just go for it. You know, it's like a red rag to a bull. They will just go fully on the charge at that point. Now, unfortunately, our IS-7, who has been being relatively sensible up until now and he's been staying hull down and trying to use his armour, he just charges in, and we know how many tanks are back there. I mean, the Waffle's been spotted, but the 121 still hasn't. That's a top-tier medium tank who is playing like a fragile tank destroyer. But it is... yep, there he is. Kvalan's rapidly running out of tanks, allies here. And the other flank is barely making progress. And like I said, the most cursory glance at the minimap would tell the tanks on the other side of the map that this is happening. That they need to go on the offensive, that they need to take that flank and then come back and help out. Because, although time is running out for this team, and that 121 is, frankly, you know, as a top tier medium tank bounce, in this position, he is absolutely wasting his potential. He's really not doing the right thing at all. Even so, this flank is just about dead, and if the enemy team, you know, if that 121 weren't Kemp Bush, if that wasn't his entire attitude for this battle, if they'd pushed up, if they'd taken this flank down a lot sooner, they could have just pushed round and capped. At which point, the tanks on the other flank would have been kind of pincered. They would have been caught between two lots of tanks. Artillery has taken an interest in him somewhat in this battle, but he's never had more than a couple of hundred, fortunately. So, yeah, he's still in fairly low health at the moment, though. This is still dangerous. If that 121 finally finds his W key, things might get a bit interesting. Although, frankly, he's shown no sign of it so far. So, there's one of those scenarios where you can look at something that one particular enemy tank is doing and think, if they'd, you know, fully exploited their potential, given the matchmaking, given the vehicle they are in, they could have significantly, potentially, altered what we're seeing on screen right now, but they didn't. They were very passive, and Kvalan is pretty beat up right now, and clearly worried that he's going to get flanked, because the AMX 5120 is pretty mobile, the 121 potentially mobile, and oh, snapshot, damaged gun, kills the guy anyway. Sometimes RNGesus just goes, oh, go on then, and just gives you a little, you know, a little reward for all the low rolls and the stupid low pen rolls and the resultant bounces that cost you your tank and stuff like that. Just occasionally RNGesus turns around and gives you something in return, or so it feels like. So the other side, they've finally pushed round. We're down to the last just over a minute. And oh hello, there's enemy Artie, who has spotted him, so they're going to know exactly where he is. We know where the Waffenträger last was, we know where the 121 last was, and was for the majority of the battle. Kvalan having a quick look to see if we can get that, but what's this on the minimap? Oh, yes. Finally he found his W key. That guy was incredibly lucky in that he bounced the one shot that Kvalan was able to take at him. And he's going to get even luckier because he basically gets away scot-free. I mean, it was... It's hard to, like, you can't not be able to see the game from the enemy team's point of view, but that 121 despite his 3 kills, you know, he doesn't really have that much damage considering he's in a top tier medium tank. For this matchmaking, he really did waste his potential. And it maybe feels like I'm picking on this guy in particular, but it's sort of like an object lesson, you know, what not to do in this kind of scenario. And he takes 1 hit, but he's going to get away with his tank, basically. And he does have a few repair costs, but anyway. He could have changed the outcome of this battle, but he didn't. So it wound out being a win just by time, basically. Kvalen's team effectively ran out the clock, even though they did eventually get moving, they did eventually push around, but even despite that performance, I mean, that was only a 2nd class for Kvalen, 5700 damage, 934 base XP, although he had a high caliber and a cool headed. But if we get to the 3rd screen, which we will in a second, look at that, 3 kills, 1780 damage, that 121, yeah, no. But the real headline figure for this video is 33,090 potential damage. 33,000. Yep, that'll be an E3 then. I mean, it was just the right, like the fact that there was artillery, but it was a tier 8 artillery, and it was a French tier 8 artillery, so it wasn't going to do him that much damage unless he shot his sides and rear. Well, that was lucky. The 121 being so incredibly passive was lucky. I mean, the rest of his team that were on that flank were actually, like the E4, as I was saying, actually did a reasonably good job. The IS-7's a bit further down the team list, but he still did some damage before he went down, although the fact that he did rush forward like that was slightly baffling, given they knew exactly how much was there. But all in all, that was a pretty good performance, and I think it's the kind of thing that all E3 drivers would aspire to, but it's probably the kind of thing that just doesn't happen very often. The exact right circumstances have to line up. You have to be on a relatively open map, and you have to be sort of at range, and there has to be little to no artillery to worry about, and you have to have enemies that are unwilling to drive up and around you. I mean, it's like something like the VKB, for instance. The easiest way to overcome a tank like that is just to drive around it, and it's even easy with an E3 because the E3 doesn't have a turret. But he was able to keep those guys shooting at his frontal armor, and that's how we racked up that 33,000. So that was pretty impressive. That is the highest amount of potential damage I personally have ever seen in a battle. I'm sure there are YouTube videos out there of people with even more potential, you know, it's possible. But even for that matchmaking, I think that was a pretty impressive result. And hopefully, I mean, this always happens when I put up a video, I get a kind of a trickle of replay of that particular tank, and I don't necessarily use them right away, but if a couple of more good E3 games land in my inbox, well, you know, I won't be displeased about that either. So, if you enjoyed this battle, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can subscribe to my channel, and, as always, stay tuned for more.